Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. Not a lot has been changing in the news as far as guns. The bills that were in Washington State died, that were left. So there's a lot of hope for freedom in the Northwest. Not in Oregon. Sorry, I was thinking about Oregon for some odd reason. Last night's podcast made me think about a couple of things. And I don't know which direction to go, so I'm going to start with one of the counter to the AR. So how did I start with the Kalashnikov? Okay. Now I've hinted at this and I've told you about this on New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. It was my first black rifle. So up to that point, I had German and Spanish military surplus rifles. My first rifle, first deer rifle, was actually a Spanish 7mm Mauser. And it was, I'll go on that tomorrow. I'll go off on that tangent on my first exposure to firearms. But I thought my first exposure to the Kalashnikov is where I needed to start as a counterweight to, being a newbie to the AR and how we're supposed to get people into the 2A. The AR-15 is America's rifle. The Kalashnikov was my first exposure to black rifles. And military rifles or military-style rifles were something that were part of my upbringing. My dad was a huge military surplus collector, and that's how I started hunting, was collecting surplus rifles with my dad. My dad was particularly fond of the 8mm, the K98. But the Kalashnikov, up to that point, I had two deer rifles. I had an 8mm Mauser and an 8mm .6. And if you don't know what an 8mm .6 is, I'll explain that tomorrow night in tomorrow's podcast. But my dad had hurt his back, and he got a payout from the city, which he worked for, and he got his tax money about the same time, his income tax return. And it was tradition in my family, because we didn't have a lot of money, and we were kind of scratching out an existence, but we shot, we hunted, and sometimes we hunted for food. And I had wanted an SKS a long time ago, and I got an SKS. My dad got it through a trade somehow, and after having the SKS, I really kind of bubbled it to a point, putting on, the chote stock that everybody looks at. That's a folding stock. Buying the 30-round Extendo magazine with the duck bill that tried to make it into a Kalashnikov. And that there was a point in time where I started thinking about, man, I really just want a Kalashnikov. I want an AK. I'd done a lot of research on the development of the Kalashnikov. I had read I don't know how many articles about it. I had my SKS, and my dad said, hey, why don't you let me have that SKS, and I'll give you the cash to go buy this Kalashnikov. Now, at the time, this is right around the assault weapons ban, so you couldn't just buy a Kalashnikov without it being neutered. Let's just put it that way. So my dad went and did some research. He went to a local pawn shop here, gun store and pawn shop that sold tack. Still does to this day. And the gentleman that owns it, his name is Glenn. I've known him forever. Dude knows me since I was barely tall enough to look over at guns with my dad holding me. And I'm 46 now, so that should tell you something. So Glenn's an older dude nowadays, and he's hunted a long time in his life, and he's got some great trophies to show it. But they had been getting these Chinese Mac 90s in, and that is a Kalashnikov, okay? And I drooled over these things. My dad finally decided, well, we're going to pop the cherry and go get one. So Glenn brought out a brand new Polytech, actually it was a Norinco Mac 90, so it's Polytech, same thing. They're Chinese made, with a thumbhole stock, but it had all the kit. And when I say it had all the kit, it had everything but a bayonet, because you couldn't get bayonets. And it had three 5-round magazines, and Glenn had still had a ton of Kalashnikov slab-side Chinese-made magazines. And Dad bought me 5 Kalashnikov 30-round magazines for it. Now I took this out and I learned how to shoot it, and I could never get the thing zeroed because I had, in all my articles in Western thought, no one had really explained how to zero the Kalashnikov. It wasn't until much later in my journey that I would actually figure that out. So my first AK, or my first black rifle, was a Norinco Mac 90. Now, we got in a tight, and my mom was pawning things and not telling us that stuff was, she was pawning things, and my dad made the mistake of leaving his key to the gun cabinet out in the open, and she took that, and she took a 44 Magnum, which I had gotten at the same time, and she had pawned them. So I lost my Mac 90. Fast forward a couple years, and I'm now old enough to buy guns. I'm 18. I was 18 when I bought my first Kalashnikov on my own, where my dad didn't buy it for me. I bought a Romanian Wasser 10. Now, anyone who knows the history of the Kalashnikov rifle knows that the Wasser 10s back in this particular time frame weren't the greatest rifles. And what usually would happen with Kalashnikovs when they'd come in from import, there are import rules that say you can't import Kalashnikovs, or there were at the time. Now there are a lot of rules that say you can't import Kalashnikovs from Russia or China. And what's funny about the Chinese Kalashnikovs is they were bringing them in with the slides, the holes cut in the rail slides, so that you could put a fully automatic trigger group in them with just punching a hole, and without doing any other modification, really. And that's why there was some gangs out in California that got a hold of Kalashnikovs, Mac 90 specifically, and did this, and that raised the ire, and they banned them along with anything from China because of it, because China wasn't adhering to our weird rules. So Romanian Wasser, so Cougar, that's who makes the Romanian Wasser 10, was allowed to import them through Century Arms, and they were pretty cheap. I got my first Romanian Kalashnikov for about $350. Nowadays you buy a Wasser 10 and you're looking at $900 easy, $1,000. The new ones are better than the one I got then. And why is that the case? Well, you have to understand that the Kalashnikov isn't built to American standards. It never has been, never will be. It requires a huge mass of machinery and technical know-how and tooling to spin up to produce them at scale. And that's how they became so cheap, was that anyone that said they were a communist, the Russians just gave them the tooling, the specs, and the data packet to make Kalashnikov rifles. Well, Romania was one of the Eastern Bloc countries that got them. So mine had canted front sights. What that means is the front sight is slightly off-center. And in the Russian parlance, or in the Eastern parlance of rifles, if you can zero the rifle, it's still okay, even if it has canted sights. Well, this is about the time that I started to learn how you actually push the front sight left or right and adjust up or down on the post up front to adjust for windage and elevation, not just the bullet drop compensator on the slide on the back of the rear sight of the Kalashnikov. And being a Mauser convert to the Kalashnikov, it makes a lot of sense because you're used to that barleycorn type style of sight anyway. And I never understood how I couldn't adjust the front sight. You can on the Mauser, but you're going to have to bend it basically, or pound it one way to the other to get it to move left or right. I never had to do that really with a K98, but I learned how to do it with a Kalashnikov. So that was my second Kalashnikov. Now my third, because I have 6 of the guys now. My third was a second Romanian one because right around the Obama era, I decided that Kalashnikov rifles, there's going to be a Russian ammunition ban, and we're not going to be able to get Russian ammunition. So this wasn't that long ago in my lifetime. So I sold my Kalashnikov. This was after I had my second AR-15, and I decided that was the way to go, because the 7.62x39, while it's cool, it's heavier round, it's more barrier blind. I'm very used to it. It was very plentiful in the day. I was reading some tea leaves and thinking that they were going to ban it way sooner than they actually did. So that was my second Kalashnikov that I got. My third was another Romanian one, and that third one I got in the panic buy, when all this stuff was going on with elections, and their ammunition was still plentiful for the Kalashnikov, the 7.62x39 type variant anyway. Even more so for the 5.45 back then. I should have bought a ton of 5.45 rifles back then, because it turns out that's one of the Kalashnikov rifles. It is the Kalashnikov caliber that I actually prefer. Lighter recoil, flatter shooting, same capacity, same ergonomics. What happened during this phase of my life, being a Kalashnikov guy, is I learned the Eastern way of running a rifle. And when I say Eastern, I mean the Russian way, the Polish way. I learned from Spetsnaz, former Spetsnaz that made it to the United States. My dad knew some people that put me in contact with some people. And I met some Vietnamese people who never really bothered to zero their weapons, but knew a lot about them. I met some former Mujahideen people that had migrated to the United States legally. I met former CIA agents. I met some Marines and soldiers that served in Vietnam and around the globe, and they had a grudging respect for the Kalashnikov, that they always considered it inaccurate, until they shot mine after I had zeroed it. Now, I didn't know the proper way to Russian zero it, or the proper way to zero it 100%. I had a rough idea, but I wasn't very good at it, until I started getting introduced to Rob Ski at the AK Operators Union. Now, being a Kalashnikov guy that had 3 of these rifles in his lifetime, and had 2 at the current time frame, because about that time frame when the panic buy set in and I bought the Romanian Wasser, I bought my first 5.56 Kalashnikov, my SLR 106. And my thought process there was, I like that I have one ammunition caliber that's American sourced that allows me to keep the Kalashnikov that I'm used to, but I can run it just like I run my Kalashnikov. I learning from actual operators of the Kalashnikov. You learn some tips and tricks that make it a lot more feasible. The one downside that I'll say about the Kalashnikov is that it doesn't have a last round hold open, which you get used to as a Western shooter, especially with the AR-15. But it seems to be a thing that the Europeans don't really care about, because a lot of their rifles, the FAMAS, doesn't do that. The F1 didn't. The G3 rifles didn't hold open on the last round open. Some of the prototypes of the G36 didn't. It was an afterthought, and the idea was that you would allow, if you held the bolt open after the last round, there's a possibility that dirt and crap would get inside the chamber, and that would screw up the gun. It would, in a battlefield situation, that's kind of a real deal. So fast forward a little bit farther, I did some horse trading, and I traded an AR-15 build that I got really, really cheap. During a Super Bowl sale from Mr. Guns and Gear, they had one that a special, you could buy an Anderson AR-15 almost complete for sub $300. I bought it, put it together, brought it to maybe $350 worth with a very cheap optic. And I traded a friend who wanted an AR-15 for, and this was all still legal back then, because that's not legal to do in New Mexico. What's still legal in the United States, but not legal in New Mexico, because you have to do background checks for that stuff now. This was pre-background checks in New Mexico. Universal background checks, that is. So I traded this, and I ended up with 6,000 rounds of 5.45 for a Malott Vepr 5.45. Okay. Now, right around this time is when I formally adopted my kids. And Palmetto State Armory was coming out with their kits, and my youngest son was like, hey, we should build one of these rifles, because this is something that I've always known Dad to have as a Kalashnikov. We need to build one and see how to build one. Now, Palmetto State Armory has a Kalashnikov, or had a Kalashnikov builder, quote-unquote, builder kit. Is basically a fully assembled rifle except for its furniture set, its trigger group, and the bolt and carrier group had to be installed into it. Now, I've swapped out furniture sets on Kalashnikovs more times than I can count. I've tested and tried everything except for Zenitco, and that's because I've never been able to buy the stuff because it's expensive, and it's hard to get because it's Russian-based, or it was back then, still is now, and now it's gone extremely expensive now, and Midwest Industries is making a lot of the same type stuff anyway, so there's really no point in having Zenitco. Plus, having a Kalashnikov, the one thing you'll notice between an AR-15 and a Kalashnikov is the rifle is already about 1.5 pounds, maybe 2 pounds heavier than a standard AR-15. But I didn't care. I shoot rifle. So I shot my 5.45, and I fell in love with that gun. And I decided I wanted to learn how to build a real Kalashnikov. So this was probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And I found a Bulgarian 74 kit. I paid a little bit more than I wanted to. I paid about $650 for it, I think. And I found an American-made barrel for it. And I found a 74 flat, AK-74 flat, receiver flat. And I took it to my friend Bill, and Bill, who's built a couple of these kits himself, he's like, hey man, whenever you're ready to build one and learn how to do it, I'll show you how to do it. So he showed me how to build the receiver out and harden it, and then rivet all the pieces together and mill the hole for the gas block so that it'll actually cycle the gun. He showed me how to head space the gun. I assembled this, learned how to do it from scratch, basically, how you would do it in a Kalashnikov factory. And I ended up with my AK-74, and that was my last build. So what have I learned through all this? I'm still Kalash boy. I don't care what anybody says about them. I have gotten about the same accuracy as I do out of an AR-15, rack-grade AR-15. If you know what you're doing, if you use the right loads, it isn't sight radius. It isn't that the barrel will float on you or will fold on you like a lot of military people have been taught. It really does matter the trigger group you put in them so that you get an ALG or something like that, or you have enough expertise on modifying, I would say, taking the burrs off the triggers. You're not doing anything illegal. You're not trying to make it fully automatic. You're just smoothing out the break so that it breaks consistently. Once you do that, you end up with a very reliable, very serviceable rifle, and a very pleasant shooting rifle. Now, all Kalashnikovs are overgassed. That they do that for reliability's sake. So they're going to be more recoil with the rifle, especially in a 7.62 by 39 versus something like an AR-15. An AR-15 has there's a lot of people now, one of my friends included, that's really big fans of the 7.62 by 39 caliber and decided that they were going to make a AR-15 in that caliber. Now, to me, it defeats the purpose because the round is kind of a dirty round. When I say that, it fouls a lot. And for a rifle like the AR-15, that's something that it's known to not be very good for, is resisting fouling. I would tell you, after hard use with my AR-15s, I've realized they are a lot more reliable and dependable than people ever let on, especially some of those old dudes from Vietnam that hated it. But you have to look at the teething problems that the AR-15 had back then. They used the wrong propellant, which caused it to foul. They didn't issue them with gun clean kits. There's a lot of history in our AR-15 to bring it to the M16 that it is today. There's a reason why that is. The same thing happens with Kalashnikov. The Kalashnikov from the 1940s is still basically the same design. They've just improved upon some ergonomics and the furniture on it. And if you look at like the AK-12, what they were trying to do is modernize the sight system and make it more modular to compete with the AR-15 or to run against it, because their competitors, the people they would face in the field, have something that is modular in design. And that's part of modern design. That's my story with the Kalashnikov and where I fell in love with it. It was because my dad and I bonded on the idea. It was a rifle I could afford at the time because back then, $350, $450 was a lot of money, but it wasn't the $750 or $950 or $1,000 for a decent built AR-15. And back then, it wasn't a thing there wasn't as many parts manufacturers that manufactured AR-15 parts to where you could buy and build them. You could build them to some degree, but you couldn't get the parts as easily, and you'd have to wait to get the parts to build the gun. And I wasn't willing to wait as a younger kid, 16 years old, that I wanted a completed rifle. And I killed one deer with my 7.62 by 39 Kalashnikov. I'm very happy it's one of the rifles that I feel comfortable with no matter what. That's because of experience, from 16 till 46, that's 30 years that I've been messing around with a Kalashnikov. I might have learned a thing or two in that time frame, but I didn't learn it alone. I learned it from mentors. Rob Ski from AKOU did a lot and does a great service for teaching people about the AK rifle. He's doing a lot of things with long-range shooting now, and I find myself being drawn to that long-range shooting channel so I can see if I can improve my long-range skills, because Rob Ski is also a Army sniper, and he trains Army snipers. And his daughter Veronica has been shooting at 1,000 yards now, and she's won several matches, and she's, a teenager. It's how we bond, what we do, and that's the other thing that gets back to where I'll leave it off for tonight, and I'll start talking about where my dad and I bonded with those military surplus rifles, and how we started learning to hand load for them, and started stretching their legs to, 300 yards, 500 yards, and beyond. Like, share, subscribe. Most importantly, be great.